Welcome to AP Environmental Science. This is Chapter 6, Population and Community Ecology. Excuse me, Video 1, and this is Ms. Lewison. It is important that you know the levels of complexity within the environment. The simplest is the individual. If there are several individuals of the same species, that is a population. All the populations within an area is the community. If you then add the abiotic factors in the community's environment, we get an ecosystem, and all the ecosystems on Earth together make up the biosphere. These are the definitions for the terms population, community, and ecosystem. A population is a group of individuals of the same species living in a particular area at the same time. A community is all the populations in a given area. And the ecosystem is all the abiotic and biotic components in that given area. Much of this chapter is about population ecology. We are going to go over and discuss the many factors and characteristics of a population, such as population growth rates, distribution, and density. We have already discussed population size, including how births, deaths, immigration, and emigration affect population size. Be sure to review that information. Population density is a measure of the number of individuals of a population in a given area. Population density is usually recorded as the number of individuals per meter squared. Population density is very important when discussing certain factors, and we will come back to it in a moment, but we are going to move on to population distribution for now. Population distribution refers to the arrangement of individuals within an area. There are three types of distribution: random, clumped, and uniform. Random is not very common in nature due to the fact that resources required by organisms are seldom uniformly distributed in an area, which is what would have to happen for random distribution to occur. Where you often do see random distribution is the weeds in our yards. Due to the fact that humans often apply fertilizers to their lawns, the weeds will often grow throughout the lawn with no set pattern. Uniform distribution occurs with territorial organisms. Organisms are usually territorial because there are limited resources within the area, and they need to defend an area in order to have access to those resources. Plants can also be territorial. It is called allelopathy. They usually use chemicals to keep other individuals or species from growing in the area around them, and therefore reduce the competition for the resources in the ground, water, and/or sunlight. Lastly, there is clumped. Clumped distribution is the most common in nature. Many organisms are clumped because there is safety in numbers, while others are clumped due to the fact that resources within the ecosystem are also usually clumped, so they are found in the same locations. This image allows you to visualize what each of the distribution types look like, the top being random, middle being uniformed, which shows the birds nesting, and then clumped with the meerkats. Two other characteristics is the sex ratio of a population and the age structure. Sex ratio is the number of males to females and depends on the species. It may need to be more even distribution, or in the case of a herd animal, there may need to be more females than males. Then there's age structure. An age structure looks at how many individuals are present for different age brackets. We use age structures more frequently with human populations, so we will look at age structures in Chapter 7. The Lincoln Index is also called the mark and recapture method, and this is one of the ways we can use to estimate the population size of an organism. The idea is that the ratio of tagged animals to the total population size is equal to the ratio of tagged organisms in the recapture to the total organisms caught in the recapture. We will be using this method to, We will be using this method to determine the population size of goldfish in class. There are several ways to write the formula. We will discuss them in class, but this is one of them. You have the total original tagged divided by the mean sample percentages times 100, and that will give you an estimated population size. We want the estimated population size to be within 20% so that we are making the correct recommendations. Anything error higher than that can cause problems. There are other ways to estimate population size, such as trip cameras, as well as the use of quadrats and transects, and we will go over these methods in class. Okay, let's jump back to population density. Population density becomes important when we discuss density-dependent factors. Density-dependent factors are factors such as disease or predation that increase when a population's density increases. Examples of density-dependent factors are resources that may be such as competition, or resources that there may be competition for, such as food, water, nutrients, and space, as well as things such as disease and predation. These factors will also serve as limiting factors when it comes to population size. We will discuss limiting factors further when we get to logistic population growth. This graph shows the effects of density on the number of lambs born. As the density increases, the number of lambs produced decreases due to higher levels of competition for resources amongst the adults. There are also density-independent factors that affect a population no matter what the population's density is. Examples of density-independent factors are natural disasters like droughts, floods, fires, and volcanic eruptions. Whether there are 100 organisms or 3,000 does not matter when it comes to the effects of a forest fire. The effect to the individual will be the same no matter what the population density is. That is a density-independent factor. Just to refresh your memory, population density is the number of organisms per unit area. Density can change if the number of organisms changes, or if the size of the area changes. In the two ovals, there are 16 organisms in each. So the density changes because the size of the area they are in changes. Next up is population growth models. We will be discussing exponential and logistic growth curves. The growth rate of a population is the number of offspring an individual can produce in a given time period, minus the deaths of the individuals or offspring during the same period. The intrinsic growth is the growth rate under ideal conditions with unlimited resources. Therefore, this is the maximum potential growth rate of a population. Exponential growth occurs when a population grows at its intrinsic growth rate with unlimited resources. This is also referred to as a population's biotic potential. Exponential curves are also called J-curves. Exponential growth cannot continue indefinitely because at some point there will be a reduction of necessary resources that will decrease the growth rate. The other type of growth curve is called the logistic growth curve, or S-curve. In the logistic growth curve, the population starts out at an exponential growth rate, but the growth rate eventually starts to slow due to limiting factors. A limiting factor will ultimately determine the population's carrying capacity. The carrying capacity is the maximum population size that the environment can support. Carrying capacities can vary from year to year or season to season because the amount of the limiting factor can also vary. The graph for the logistic growth curve starts off just as the exponential growth curve, but when the population reaches about 1/2 the carrying capacity, the growth rate begins to slow. This slowing is often referred to as environmental resistance. I apologize for that. Okay. So at about 1/2 the carrying capacity, the population will start to slow, and this is referred to as environmental resistance. Now I'm all distracted. The population levels off around the carrying capacity. It's important for you to note that the optimal growth rate is often referred to with a lowercase r, and the carrying capacity is identified by a capital K. And this will come up when we speak later on in the chapter about different strategies animals have. This is another graph of logistic growth. This is a more realistic graph because the populations cannot maintain a constant population size. This graph shows that the populations will usually fluctuate around the carrying capacity. When the population size goes above the carrying capacity, it is referred to as an overshoot. And then when it drops below the carrying capacity, it is referred as a die-off. We often see these overshoots and die-offs with seasonal changes in food availability and other factors. A population's carrying capacity is often not determined by just one limiting factor, so we often refer to environmental resistance as the sum of all these factors affecting a population's size. I like this visual because it helps you to identify the various factors that can increase as well as decrease a population size. In fact, these factors are constantly changing due to changing environmental conditions, and therefore a population size will vary as well as over a period of time. Sorry, I'm getting very distracted. Okay, so take a look at this. There's both biotic and abiotic factors that can both increase, i.e. increase your biotic potential or your optimal growth rate. And then there's also your environmental resistance, those factors that will decrease your population size. It's an interesting graph or visual. Moving on. I cannot talk now. Scientists have been studying populations for quite some time now and have learned some very interesting things. What they have found is that many of our initial hypotheses were wrong. We have learned that large mammal populations, like moose, are not stable and can be affected by weather and predators. Isle Royale is an interesting case study. Wolves were introduced to the island with the hopes that they would help to stabilize and control the moose population. In fact, the predation by the wolves did not have a significant effect on the moose population, but extreme winters did. What this tells us is that an organism's interaction with its environment is very complex, and that a population size is most definitely controlled by numerous factors and cannot be whittled down to just one. This is another type of population size fluctuation we often see in larger organisms called boom and bust cycle. Boom and bust cycles are basically exponential growth curves with a sudden die-off or bust. These types of growth curves is often seen with smaller organisms that have a short lifespan and that produce numerous offspring very rapidly. Think of love bugs. You see a few one day, a bunch more the next day. A few days later, they are everywhere. But a few days after that, they're gone. That would be a boom and bust cycle. The organisms never establish a carrying capacity and are not affected by density-dependent factors. Organisms who go through a boom and bust cycle are also referred to as R-strategists or R-selected species. We will be discussing R-strategists in more depth in the next video. This is a diagram showing a boom and bust for the reindeer that were introduced to the Poblovo, I cannot say that, island. Initially, there was exponential growth, and then they ended up crashing and actually became extinct on the island due to their crash, due to a loss of resources. So this happens with all kinds of animals. Okay, this figure represents the population cycle of the snowshoe hare and the Canadian lynx, and this is a very classic example as well. At one time, scientists believed these curves provided evidence that these predator and prey populations regulated one another. More recent research suggests that the periodic swing in the hare population is caused by a combination of top-down population control through the predation by lynx and other predators, and bottom-up population control, in which changes in the availability of food supply for the hare help to determine their population size, which in turn helps to determine the lynx's population. So what we're finding is that it's not just predators who are controlling the lynx population or the hare population, but that their food supply also does. So basically what's eating you as well as what you're eating is going to both have an effect on your population size, which is quite understandable actually. Okay, so this is going to wrap up video 1 for chapter 6. If you have any questions, please let me know. We're going to be doing a lot of activities in class, but if for some reason you have any kind of questions about any of this, please let me know so I can go over it in class. Have a nice evening. Thank you.